English. Awesome, thanks for everyone for coming tonight. This is a modern data warehouse journey from on-premise to cloud. My name is Gerald Hartley, and here's what to expect tonight. So this is going to be a 100 level session, which means it's friendly for beginners, intermediates, professionals, or anyone involved in tech in any sort of way. Assuming that's going to be most of us here, otherwise you're probably in the wrong room, so if you can politely leave, because this might not be so fun for you. This isn't a deep dive or a demo focus, it's me talking about my experiences and challenges moving from an on-premise environment to a cloud-based environment, and hopefully encourage everyone to get a bit of discussion going, share some ideas and their own experiences as well. Now, my experience has been mainly with the Microsoft Business Intelligence platform, but the stories and concepts could be applied to any type of cloud services platform, whether it be Amazon AWS, Google Cloud Platform, or Snowflake. Bit of an agenda tonight. The story so far, I'll give you a bit of a background about why technology has been the biggest shift that we've seen in the industry in recent years, and from a personal viewpoint, why I was so intrigued about it. The journey of 1,000 miles, how to get buy-in, how to get started working with the tools, and what to do if you struggle to get these over the line at your workplace. And now that I'm working with the tool sets, let's compare the different approaches between on-premise and cloud-based technologies and break down the things that are great and the not so great. Now, here's everything you need to know about me. So let me take you a bit down my own data journey so far. I'm born and bred in Christchurch, New Zealand. Come on, Christchurch, woo woo! Currently working for Meridian Energy, which is one of New Zealand's largest companies in the energy sector, who deal with both electricity generation and the retail market. But prior to that, I've worked for local and international companies in the construction and insurance sectors. And I've spent about 9 years working in the data space, primarily with Microsoft Business Intelligence solutions, which were mainly hosted on-prem. And at this stage, I hadn't dealt with cloud-based technology, that is, until recently. So as I said, I'm based in my hometown of Christchurch, New Zealand. Now, you could be forgiven for not knowing where that is, because it's a running joke that New Zealand is routinely missing from maps, and it's supposed to be about there. I can't forgive any of you in this room if you don't know where New Zealand is. You've probably got bigger problems there. But shortly graduating back in 2011, Christchurch made headlines around the world for all the wrong reasons. Because tragedy struck when Christchurch experienced one of the worst disasters that it had faced in recent years. Magnitude 6.3 earthquake struck the city, destroying homes, claiming lives, disrupting businesses, and impacting thousands of New Zealanders in the process. And yeah, definitely, times were tough. Some of us went through those. Jobs and careers sometimes had to be put on hold while we had to deal with the issues immediately in front of us. But whether it's a tragedy like this on a local scale or a global pandemic that we're facing at the moment, there's really only one way to move, and that's move forward. And so after some time, Christchurch would actually rise from the ashes and rebuild from this disaster. And so one industry in particular experienced a massive surge in work coming through, and that industry was, of course, the construction industry. And so opportunity struck when one such company was looking for an eager, confident, fresh-faced up-and-comer to help with the increasing calls and workload from their support desk. But instead they hired this guy. I wish I could grow hair like that again, I really, really do. No, they chose this guy. So this picture was literally taken on day one, and look at that face, so young, so chubby. Oh, if only he knew what was going to happen, if only he knew. Because it was with civil infrastructure company CityCare, where I would get to start as a desktop and development support technician. And if that sounds like 2 jobs covered by one single resource, yeah, you'd be about right. And it probably worked out as well as you could imagine. But it was a great opportunity because I managed to get some really solid grounding in both technical and developmental support. And once I found my feet, I was able to shift into a full-time development support role and work alongside an amazing team of talented, knowledgeable developers. And so at this point, I'd sort of dabbled in Oracle and SQL Server during my studies, but let's face it, I knew nothing. So it was in the first 3 to 4 years of my career that I'd grow from knowing very little about SQL Server to knowing absolutely everything there is to know. And courtesy of a little thing called the Dunning-Kruger effect, quickly realizing that there's much more to this than I thought. But I got to get some experience in so many different areas: troubleshooting queries, optimizing performance, reporting, migrations, analytics, architecture. Now, I didn't know it at the time, but the experience would be career defining, as it's the first time that I would be involved in an area that I never stumbled across during my studies, and that was data warehousing. So even way back in 2012, just starting out in the job, I started to hear murmurings and whispers about Amazon, that's the online bookshop site, that offers virtual storage and compute services, which are starting to gain a bit of traction. And so the market responded by offering many types of infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service solutions over the years. In 2010, Microsoft started releasing their offerings under the official Azure brand. And while it was interesting for me to hear about this new virtual infrastructure resource, it was probably a bit too early in my career to even fathom some of the benefits of these solutions. I was still getting my head around SQL Server syntax and reporting services. I wouldn't be touching this stuff for years to come, way further down the line. But there were discussions being had, because consider the situation at the time. It's been 1 year since one of New Zealand's greatest natural disasters. So obviously the hottest topic then was disaster recovery. Servers and hardware were in need of replacing. Some locally hosted servers and equipment were damaged, or patches and updates were well overdue for some of the most critical systems. Purchase costs of new or replacement hardware were mounting up just to keep up with the increased demand. Supply chain disruptions meant orders and deliveries had much longer waiting times than expected. Staff and team members were also displaced and needed concurrent access to critical resources and development environments from anywhere, as it wasn't always possible for staff to actually come into the office. All of this while ensuring our core systems were resilient, they were responsive, and they were able to keep up with the demands of the company, whether it be the business as usual or the ever-increasing reactive work. But again, it was 2012, and these were early days as far as cloud was concerned. Bandwidth limitations meant network performance was a critical issue for some companies, while poor coverage meant network connectivity and availability really wasn't as reliable as it is now. And although they had security and protection measures in place at the time, data was being sent and hosted externally. If you're handling data from customers or external businesses, then data security and privacy were huge concerns at the time. Pricing plans weren't as fleshed out or transparent, which made costs difficult to estimate. And there wasn't a lot of experts in the industry that we could look on to have reliable hands-on experience with cloud technologies. And so while the idea was nice and the benefits were clear, risk was far too high to become an early adopter of cloud offerings at this stage. And well, fair enough, back then a lot of these were incredibly valid concerns, given the limitations we had at the time. But the stability and the familiarity we had with on-premise solutions made it the clear winner for now. So as I developed my career over the years, I'd get experience working with medium to large size companies within the construction, the insurance and energy sectors, helping them build, develop and maintain their data warehouse solutions. Now, I'd primarily develop these solutions using Microsoft's business intelligence stack, such as using technology such as SQL Server databases, integration services, reports, analytics services, Power BI. And so the majority of my time will be spent working with on-premise production environments and technology, either hosted internally or with our local vendors. Now, this diagram would be the typical infrastructure pattern that I'd be dealing with, but more on that a bit later. But by about 2015, business was really picking up in the cloud space. The cloud started gaining traction as providers were throwing piles of cash just to expand their range of service offerings and keep up with the market leaders at the time. Now, the offerings themselves were becoming flexible enough that both major companies and young startups could pick and choose the components that they wanted, and the microservices architecture really started coming into its own here. The cloud tech provided the ability to scale horizontally and vertically at just a click of a button. And this gave massive competitive advantage to companies who could quickly leverage these scalable, these flexible and constantly up-to-date systems and quickly deploy these applications to the market. And so articles started coming out with all those buzzwords that we love to hear. They were claiming that cloud technology was the massive industry game changer. It was the biggest paradigm shift that the industry has seen. It was the career ender for developers. I know this kind of stuff sounds silly in retrospect, but it was the first real threat to my job. I just found my job. I liked my job and I kind of wanted to keep it if I could. So if this was the way that the industry was headed, if there were opportunities in this space, and I best keep up with the crowd to stay relevant. It's kind of the nature of the beast. So as the years went on, we saw more and more of these articles that were gushing about the prospect of cloud, and equally as many naysayers dismissing it as a fad. But the benefits it provided were certainly enticing and would become even more so as technology improved. Because internet speeds were becoming faster, connections more reliable, cloud services were starting to guarantee uptime as part of their service level agreements. Now, security was still a concern, given how many hacks the companies have seen over the years, but security started becoming a focal point across all cloud platforms as vendors aim to provide a high level of security, a high level of access measures, providing services that come with encryption, authentication controls, and authorization right out of the box. As it gained traction, pricing plans started to become transparent and predictable. Reduced upkeep of servers in-house or expensive contracts with external vendors meant that in some cases there were savings to be had. And while hardware to an extent was actually getting cheaper, faster with higher capacity, the actual running costs and the work hours involved to keep this maintained and running, they were starting to pile up. And for those of you working with smaller companies, or if you've been around a single company for long enough, sometimes you'll find yourself playing double duties in some roles. So one day you'll be wearing your BI hat, other days you're going to be wearing your DBA hat, sys engineer hat. And although you know how to do all those tasks, all that context switching just chips away at your time and chips away at your productivity and just takes you away from your core duties, doing the things that you actually signed up and get paid to do. And so those risk factors, that list of excuses for not moving to cloud, well, technology had caught up and those list of excuses was starting to shrink. And it was evident that larger companies were already putting their cloud migration strategies into place. Up and coming startups were adopting cloud-first approaches. It wasn't just a feasible option, but it was starting to make its way to become a standard option for any new development. So I'd managed to get a few years of experience under my belt, and I'd observed the trends and patterns happening in the industry. I'd subscribe to blogs, newsletters, detailing the latest and greatest in cloud technologies. I completed courses and tutorials, attended conferences and meetups such as this one, took part in events and hackathons, and spent up my developer benefits month after month. Sometimes those were intentional, other times I forgot to switch off the VM. But even with all the training in the world, it wouldn't really amount to much unless you were working with the tools in the wild, right? It's great to read what's on the packet, but it tends to be a whole different experience actually using the thing in production. And by about 2017, 2018, there were a few more companies in my area who dipped their toe into the water with cloud tech, but none in a huge capacity. But of course, I couldn't just sit by and watch the rest of the industry outpace me. I needed to get in there and see how things look like for myself. But of course, sometimes that means going through the same rigor and same processes you do to pitch any kind of new software into a company. It's probably not the most fun thing to do in the world as a developer. So of course that meant getting buy-in. So from my experience, I found getting buy-in from fellow colleagues and workmates, that was the easy part of the job, because they could easily grasp the benefits that came from cloud-based tech, and they mostly shared the same concerns about falling behind in the industry as I did. But now you'll need to convince the people who have the ability to make the change and influence further up the chain, the ones who have the power to actually make it happen. And it's likely that they're the ones who aren't as hands-on with the tools as you are. So you're going to have to come armed with facts, figures, a prototype of sorts, and before they approve any kind of spend. Now things might be a little bit easier if you already have a team that is currently working with cloud technology for certain operations. You or another team in the business may be already using some aspect of cloud services, and assuming these services aren't already used in anger, getting buy-in may not be as challenging as it would be starting from scratch. And it's 2021, so to an extent, most people are at least familiar with the idea of cloud technology, so it won't take too long to get caught up to speed. But if you don't already have tech in the cloud, then start small. Find a smaller module which is relatively low risk or low impact, and ensure that it takes advantage of the benefits that I listed earlier. Monitor this module and start collecting metrics such as average throughput, the amount of resources it consumes, the number of staff hours that go into actually maintaining it. And plug these figures into one of the many cloud pricing calculators that all major cloud vendors provide. AWS have the AWS pricing calculator, Azure has the Azure pricing calculator, Google Cloud Platform has a calculator, and so on. And here are a few items to consider if you are trying to pitch cloud technology. And let's start with the flat model. Flexibility. If you're not ready to dive headfirst in the cloud space, if you have too many resources to make a migration feasible at this stage, then you could always try the hybrid approach. The hybrid approach means that you leverage the public cloud resources to add to your current on-premise environment. It certainly isn't necessary to ship everything off to the cloud in one fell swoop, and instead we could shift over only certain modules at a time. And perhaps maybe this is enough. Latency. Compute no longer takes place on your machine or on a local machine. The workload runs in highly optimized, highly available data centers, which are usually interconnected using dedicated lines. Limitations may exist. Limitations may exist if you're trying to send massive amounts of gigs of data across from your own machine to a cloud-based service. But again, there are migration assistants which help bulk load data up into the cloud, such as Microsoft's Azure Migration Assistant. Availability. Speaking of availability, the major cloud vendors can provide high availability on services. It only takes a few clicks to configure several redundant backups which are stored across different server clusters, stored across different data centers, across different regions, and even replicated across countries. Now, if a data center in your area goes down, it will automatically fall back to the secondary, so services can be resumed with little disruption. And fault tolerance. Fault tolerance deals with the hardware aspect. So cloud data servers run in highly scaled, highly distributed virtual environments. If anyone's heard of Netflix's Chaos Monkey, where a program would randomly go along and knock down one of the servers to test resiliency. And if one of those servers goes down at a data center, then there should be little to no impact on your applications. Everything keeps running as normal. Cost, money. Money is the universal language. Cost is one of the biggest factors for moving to a cloud-based solution. So rather than buying all the kit, all the licenses, and dealing with all the maintenance costs which eat up time and money, with cloud solutions you can opt for a pay-as-you-go approach, meaning your costs can vary based on consumption, based on compute time, the level of performance of these resources. As mentioned earlier, pricing calculators are available to you to get cost estimates based on your current workloads. And if you're confident with traffic volumes and data size is fairly constant and predictable, you'll be able to make savings by taking advantage of purchasing reserved instances, which allow you to prepay for compute upfront in exchange for a discounted rate. And that ties in nicely with performance. If you've bought an expensive piece of equipment that maybe 80% of the time uses only less than 20% of its resources, it's probably a good chance you overspent. Or in other words, you bought a Ferrari, but you're driving it like a Toyota. The benefit of cloud services mean you can seamlessly increase or decrease performance on demand. So if you find a spike in your workload, it only takes a couple of config changes to be able to bump it up to a higher compute speed for a while and then bring it back down once the load settles. And time is money. If we're saving large amounts of time by relieving ourselves from those pesky admin tasks that take us away from our core focus, we're not just saving time, but we're potentially gaining back in productivity as well. And I'm sure devs and business users are sick and tired of being told no, simply because this version of the product doesn't have the features that we want at the moment. For those of you working in with cloud technology, you'll notice how rapidly that new features are added, generally on a monthly cadence. This does mean you'll have to be a bit vigilant about what updates are released, as some changes may impact your current environment. Changes are usually for the better, except when they're not, but that's no different from any usual system upgrade, except that all the work that goes into handling the upgrading of the applications themselves are already handled for you. And so the reality of it all, despite all the effort that you may have to go through just to get buy-in to the company, they may not be willing to take the risk to shift their platform. Even worse, you may get as far as getting verbal agreement to proceed only to find that it's constantly sidelined due to the next most urgent issue, or things just aren't happening at the pace that you thought they would happen. So your options here, wait it out and see what happens. It may just be around the corner, maybe a few years away, who really knows. If these decisions are outside your circle of influence, then that's what you may be facing. Do you have the patience to wait that long? That's kind of up to you. But in some cases, there may be another team member or another team in your organization who are using these cloud platforms already. Perhaps there's a good chance to start a conversation and find out how they're using them, why they're using them, and what their experience is. And if you've got no luck in that department and you've exhausted all other options, then the last step for any managers in the room, just cover your ears quickly for a bit. You probably want to start looking for companies who are already using these tools. But no matter what you choose, all these options require a level of effort in different areas, whether it means having to dust off your negotiation skills, whether it means having to shift teams internally or changing companies entirely. Some or maybe all of those options may be completely infeasible for you, and that's fine, because at the end of the day it comes down to what your goals are, what you're willing to put up with, and what you're wanting to achieve in your career. And don't think that by not working on cloud technology that you and your career are riding off into the sunset. Because if you've been in the game for a while with years of experience working with on-premise technologies, you'll probably still have enough work to last the rest of your career. There's still companies around who are years off from being ready to make the move. But if you are looking to start on something new, if you're looking to upskill in a new or different field, or you're just starting out in the data world, then by all means, give the cloud stack a go. And don't ask me about it, there are a lot of jobs out there who are looking for cloud-based skills, so they're highly sought after skills to have. And if you're wondering what option I took, well, it'd be the final option on that list. Because at my previous job, we were in a constant state of being always one step away from cloud-based technologies. We got the buy-in, we got the training, we scoped out the initial processes, but it was constantly sidelined for next highest priority and always just a bit out of reach. Would it come eventually? Probably, but not at a speed that I was happy with. So it was 2020 of all years, a year of big change, where I noticed a job as a business intelligence developer working with cloud technology. One of the requirements of the role was to have experience working with the Microsoft Azure platform, of which I had very little to none. Now, for those who are kind of early in their careers, you might mistake this as, oh, wait a second, this is listed as a requirement, but I don't meet the requirement. Oh, okay, I'm just going to have to sit that one out. But no, it was literally one requirement out of several, and certainly not the deal breaker that it made it out to be. But what I did have was several years of solid on-premise experience under my belt, a solid grasp of data warehousing concepts and models, a fairly crisp-looking resume, and some supportive references lined up. So a few takeaways from this: understand the benefits and risks involved. Technology has gained huge traction over the years, and even though there were quite a few initial limitations to start off with, it's definitely gained maturity as a technology, and uptake has certainly increased. Getting buy-in, you might have to broaden your horizons just a wee bit and start working on those negotiation skills to make sure management are aware of those benefits. And FOMO, fear of missing out, love those acronyms. Don't think that all those years in an on-premise environment will dampen your career progression in any form, because cloud tech is still relatively new in the scheme of things. So even if you're just starting out, a solid grasp and core grounding in the fundamental concepts, they never really go away. So it leads us into expectations versus reality. What better way to illustrate this than with one of those meme templates? While you can read while I just have a water break. Fairly accurate from my perspective. But at the tail end of last year, I felt reasonably confident going into the new role at Meridian. The interview process gave me a clear picture on what the objectives were, the kind of tasks I'd be doing, and I felt I asked the right questions. I asked about the decisions involved, the considerations for moving to cloud, and any concerns of challenges working on the cloud platform. In this instance, I'd be working with the Microsoft Azure platform. And the project they were working on was a fairly new greenfields data warehousing project, which is going straight to cloud first. So none of those messy migration projects that some of you might have been involved with. The only part that sparked a bit of anxiety would be my familiarity with the tool sets. But as I mentioned, I completed some training courses and a few workshops, but was I going to take the typical 3 to 6 months before I was a productive member of the staff? I didn't want that. I wanted to hit the ground running. So as I mentioned earlier, this diagram would represent the type of architecture that I've dealt with for the most part of my career. I typically use an operational data source, or ODS, which consisted of a replicated copy or subset of the application database. So the majority of sources that I've dealt with were relational database, or sometimes using API feeds. So sometimes there was a need for a cross-database replication or a translation layer. ETL would be handled with SQL Server databases using views or procedures, or workflow process using SQL Server integration services, SSIS packages. The packages themselves will be kept in a form of source control where, depending on the environment, we're either deployed to a data catalog using PowerShell scripts or copied directly to the server. And from there, orchestration and scheduling of these pipelines will be handled using SQL Server agent jobs, which would then schedule and run our packages and feed into a structured data warehouse hosted on SQL Server. Data would be accessed using various tools such as Power BI, API calls, SQL Server analysis services, Tableau, Excel flat file reporting, whatever the company needed at the time we could usually handle. Now let's compare this to the type of architecture that I'm currently dealing with in my current role. Sure, the tools look a wee bit different, but the architecture seems relatively familiar. So the data warehouse itself is hosted on Azure SQL databases, while pipelines and orchestration and scheduling are handled by Azure Data Factory. Although it's, in the infrastructure I currently work with, we'd be calling APIs which output to flat files and upload these into our data warehousing environment. And although that probably doesn't sound like the most ideal implementation, Azure Data Factory has a huge collection of connectors that come out of the box. And so should the data feed change further down the line, it won't be such a hard task to actually make the switch. ETLs are designed in a similar fashion to our on-premise environment, but this time we'd design our pipelines using a mix of copy and transform routines from Azure Data Factory and views and procedures stored in Azure SQL databases. Our database models and ADF pipelines were kept in source control using Azure DevOps repositories, which handle deployment and release processes to different environments as well. And of course, scheduling is also configured inside Azure Data Factory, and pipelines were set to run at certain times of the day. And a lot similar to an on-premise environment, data would be accessed and presented through various feeds which pulled data from our cloud-based data warehouse. Again, using industry standard tools, Power BI, APIs, SSIS, Tableau, whatever needed to be done. And so before I continue, let me provide one big disclaimer. These are still early days for me, so I probably haven't used these tools long enough to hate them just yet, but I'm slightly more familiar with the tool set than when I started. So here's a few observations that I've noticed working with cloud technologies in the last few months. I enjoy the fact that there's less noise to deal with. So far my DBA hat and my sysadmin hat, they're just sitting there collecting dust at the moment. I don't miss digging into database servers to find some random app that's gone rogue and taken the database hostage. Since we're using a platform as a service solution, the environments themselves are focused on one thing and doing that right. Does it mean cloud will automatically handle my poorly written SQL queries each time? Probably not, maybe in the future, but that's currently still on me. Ease of access with Azure Active Directory. I don't have to worry about getting locked out if I'm having issues connecting to a VPN. All I need is access to internet and my phone for third-party authentication. And away I go, that's it. So in a pinch, if I needed to, I could go in, log in onto my phone and monitor processes when I didn't need to. And basically I'm just using the interface as a terminal of sorts, just to execute what I need when I need it. And the streamlined interface, compared to the workflow processes I was working with on-premise tools, I felt that Data Factory had a bit more of a streamlined process going on. In most cases, all it took was a few clicks in the same browser window to go from building pipelines to debugging Data Factory pipelines to publishing them, committing scripts into source control, all the way through to release and deploy. For Azure Data Factory, I found it worked nicely with DevOps repositories, but connectors are available for the likes of GitHub, SVN, flat file backups, and so forth. And features, new additions, no more waiting around for those planned upgrades just to get the latest and greatest features. cloud providers will release features in a public preview before they're generally available. So in a try before you buy sort of deal. Sometimes I've had to find ways to code around certain limitations in the product, but only to discover that a new change or a new fix has been released which fully addresses the problem. Yay, big win. But any architecture decision will have its trade-offs, and I think cloud is no exception. Because in exchange for that reduced effort that comes with upkeep and maintenance, on the flip side it means giving up access to areas which we had previously. The extent of this is going to vary a lot between positions, but for those working with properly implemented security standards, you might not notice any difference at all. But those who had absolute power admin rights in place, that might be a little bit more obvious. And perhaps there were times where it was fairly handy to actually go into the server and troubleshoot at the server level, make changes there and quickly launch a sneaky quick fix into production. But if you hear alarm bells ringing already, then you're well aware that the impact of this change depends on what's getting released. One mishap, one wrong move in a production environment, and it can all go terribly, terribly wrong. Now, considering the amount of close calls that I've seen, the amount of rework and general wasted time of such moves is probably a limitation I'm willing to put up with. Managing change, a regular release cadence means we have to be a bit more adaptive to change. It isn't unusual for us in the industry. We just need to be aware of the impact of changes and releases. So best practices, processes and documentation can get out of date if certain updates aren't accounted for. Usually they're changes that fix outstanding issues, improvements to existing tools, or much requests from users. But when you have a system that has so many moving parts, sometimes a small change in one system can actually have a snowball effect further down the chain. In security, we hear about major security breaches happening every day. Almost all cloud providers have at least made headlines for at least one major outage or system disruption. And yeah, it's still a concern. Your information is being transferred to the same place where mum rants on Facebook, to where the kids are watching TikTok videos, to where Gerald watches Japanese cartoons. But would I feel comfortable logging into a company's environment using public Wi-Fi network? Well, probably not so much at this stage. And network dependency. Now this one is a bit of a stretch, because at least where I am, I'm usually next to a reliable internet connection, and that's all I really need to do my job. But I'm aware that certain locations simply don't have that level of access to a reliable, stable connection. You might think that things run fast on a locally hosted internal or private network. As I mentioned earlier, all the heavy lifting runs on servers hosted in data centers. So unless you're pulling gigabytes of data back and forth from the cloud server each time from your local machine, you're pretty much just operating a terminal. Meaning connection stability will be important, but huge amounts of bandwidth, probably not so much. So what's next? Because cloud tech opens up a whole bunch of opportunities out there, which makes so many more paths for you to choose from. There's a giant list of features and services provided by Azure, and I don't know if I have enough years left in my career to be able to get through them all, but here they are. Now with the feature set this big, it's good to have some goals in mind. Cloud-based data warehouse platforms. There is an insane amount of investment going on with vendors providing fully managed cloud data platforms. Some of the big ones, some of the big players in the market include Amazon Redshift, include Snowflake, Azure Synapse Analytics, and Google BigQuery. Now, I haven't used most of these technologies outside of a sandbox myself, but I'd jump at the chance to explore these feature sets in more depth. The data engineering roadmap. Here's an awesome diagram of what apparently it takes to be a data engineer in 2021. I just like that title because my mum can say I'm an engineer now, but it'll probably take the length of a degree to actually complete that list. But it goes to show you the ever-growing list of components that sit within the modern data engineering platform. But I really love the fact that I can dust off my old coding skills and put them to use again. So finding cases where I get to develop data pipelines with the likes of Python, Scala, Java or Go, that's a pretty exciting prospect for me. So I'm doing my bit to keep those skills sharp. And exploring a bit more in the world of data architecture. You can see the faces of some of the developers now going, why would you want to go into that area? Oh my goodness, I couldn't think of anything worse. Yeah, I know, right? But all the options available in the cloud with all those moving parts involved, there were quite a number of aspects to consider. And they're particularly important if you're trying to get buy-in from the company. Because you want to think about the business value. What are we trying to achieve with a solution? Does it add value to an organization? Does it actually solve the business problem and align with the goals of the company? Which cloud service provider best provides the options that you're looking for, and who does it in the most cost-effective manner? How will users access our data assets, and who is able to access them, and how are they going to access them? And what processes do we have to ensure the quality and integrity of our data? What will it be used for, and does it comply with standards and regulations? And a couple of non-technical goals for me. I can already tick one off already. Doing presentations. I would have never thought that 5 years ago when I attended my first SQL user group, that an introvert developer like myself would be actually up here doing a presentation. So although today's topic was kind of a 100 level story session, I've got a whole checklist of ideas that I hope to cover in more detail at some point in time. But giving back, it's worth it if I get to give back to the community that's probably helped keep me in a job for so long. I don't know if it's altruism or insanity, but I'm fairly excited about the idea of contributing more, writing blog posts, video content to the community that's probably given me a lot. So if you've ever thought of sharing your story as well, then I absolutely encourage you to do the same. I guess a few recommendations that kind of helped me throughout my career. Regardless of the trends or fads, you'll stick to the work that you enjoy the most. If you really enjoy a technology to the extent that you're willing to invest your own time and your own hours into it, then stick with it. Because a lot of those tools will come and go, processes will evolve over time, but the core concepts last the span of your career and probably more. Get some buy-in from your business to invest in some resources for a small project or proof of concept. Invest in some training. Those with enterprise agreements may not realize that they have training or license benefits, such as those monthly Azure credits, courses, exam vouchers, so try and make the most of those. And if you're learning something new, like I said, try going to the cloud first. There are awesome resources from the likes of Microsoft Learn, Pluralsight, SQL, data workshops, GitHub workshops, and just all fantastic resources to play around with the technology. Ask the provider what help that they can provide, because they want your business too, so they'll be happy to provide you something for free if you're willing to stick with them. Follow posts and videos from well-known figures in the SQL community. Well, look at here. Follow posts and videos from well-known figures on likes of Twitter, Slack, local meetup groups. Tech networking. Well, congratulations, you made it here today, so you already passed that test. But talk to those currently using the technology, because not only it's a great opportunity to make connections, but you also get to discover new ideas about what people are working on, how they're actually using the tools, and why they went in the direction they did. Now, there's probably an undersupply of talent in this area, so people are probably more than happy to share their knowledge and build up some new talent. And non-tech networking. Don't forget about non-technical network groups, because there's groups dedicated to soft skills such as presentation skills, leadership, business skills, communication. And those skills not only help your business and career prospects, but you may find that within these groups that you with your tech skills are in the minority. So there's actually opportunities to show what you have to offer and discover opportunities to work on new projects using cloud-based solutions. And so that leads nicely into the final point. Find a small project to work on. If you have a project that's relevant, that's relatable, that means something to you, then be it a hobby or a club that you belong to, then you may come up with new ideas. So start ingesting your fitness activity on your smartwatch. Build a pipeline to track the win-loss record of your local sports club, or and collect, because we collect data in some form every day. So we never run out of things to track. Pick the things you like, the thing you can stick to, and stick to it. And a final thank you to everyone for letting me present today. It's been an exciting opportunity, and I look forward to do this presentation again on the 12th of March for New Stars of Data. It'll be a bit more virtual next time, but if you do have any questions, if you like what you see, if you do have any feedback as well, because I'm trying to represent Christchurch here, I'm going to try and represent the user group, so any feedback and suggestions to just help make this presentation awesome are much appreciated. Thank you.